double straddle to 200 on again, Trey raises to 500 with pocket sixes. We're in the small blind with suited Broadway cards. I 3-bet to 2,000. The big blind is a man who needs no introduction. It's the poker legend Sharkbait. For those of you who are younger viewers, Sharkbait was part of the conglomerate called the Corporation that played high-stakes poker against billionaire Andy Beal in the early 2000s. He won 2 bracelets in mixed game events and has the WPT title. Surprisingly, Sharkbait just flats at 2,000 from the big blind with pocket queens. Trey has too short of a stack to justify getting involved. He lets it go. We're heads up out of position. The flop comes ace, ace, 4. What's interesting about this is that I'm going to be 3-betting a lot of suited aces, an ace king, ace queen, and ace jack. With a lot of trips in my range, I c-bet small to 1,600 with plans to have to possibly double barrel because I anticipate our opponent having lots of pocket pairs and very few aces once he flats our 3-bet. He's going to 4-bet hands like ace king and ace queen. Potentially he'd flat ace jack and ace 10 suited, but we have removal to ace jack and ace 10 of clubs, so there's only one combo each of ace jack and ace 10 suited that's available. We also have removal to jacks and 10s, and we're normally going to get 4-bet by kings and queens. This is one of those times when we don't get 4-bet by queens, despite Sharkbait's aggressive reputation. The opponent surely won't fold to a small flop bet. He calls. The turn is the 6 of clubs. We're drawing stone dead, but that's not always important when we have the right combination of cards to continue putting pressure on someone who will rarely have trips or better, while we certainly could.
Jack 10 of clubs is actually one of your better barrel off hands here, Skull, because you block ace jack, ace 10 of clubs, some of the suited ace combos.
That's great.
So,
Once in a while we'll throw you in.
Yeah.
not too relevant, but you kind of need some non-equity triples IMO here.
Well, yeah, definitely bang me.
Spades and clubs are going to
Just
kind of
drop
be better.
an IMO, in my opinion.
Yeah, IMO, in my opinion.
6,000. I bang Scotty.
Oh, we got a turn barrel here.
Big barrel.
I like this a lot from Brad, actually. This is a nice hand to do it with. He's finding a good bluff combo.
Sharkbait up out of his seat, looking
I bet he was super cool about it, right?
He actually
across the table to his opponent, Mr. Brad Owen.
because he had it.
This is a pretty cool hand here, Skull. It's a nice big bet from Brad in the turn. Hand makes a lot of sense to bluff with. Now for Sharkbait. With queens, you're going to feel a little torn. On one hand, it's pretty easy for either player to have an ace. He's just going to let it go. Wow. Nice turn bet from Brad.
All right, Nick game.
Alright.
I'm done.
It's one of those spots I think a lot of players don't find because you can't have like a straight draw or flush draw. You got to get creative and think about what hands make the most sense to bluff with. And I think that hand specifically is a very smart hand to use, and Brad managed to figure it out and get it done.
We get a big $6,000 bluff through. The double barrel induces the fold from pocket queens. Feels good to pull a move like that against one of the guys that I looked up to when I first started playing poker. A half hour later, we've got Jack 10 of diamonds in the big blind. With the straddle on, the cutoff raises to 65. We'll be calling most of the time while mixing in occasional 3-bets. We call here and our heads up out of position. The flop comes Jack 9-7 rainbow. We've got top pair, a gutter ball, and a backdoor flush draw. I check to the pre-flop aggressor. Even though this is a solid flopper out range, he bets 75. We'll be going to the same place as Garth Brooks' career as Chris Gaines, which is nowhere. I call looking to improve. The turn is the 10 of hearts, giving us top 2, but 4 to the straight are on board. I check, expecting to get very important information from our opponent. He checks back, indicating that he'll almost never have us beat. He probably would have bet for value if he had a straight, and there just aren't many combos of sets that he can have given that we have 2 pair. The river is the deuce of spades. It's exactly the card I was hoping to see. Similar to Howard Lederer's half-hearted apology to the poker world, it doesn't change anything. If we check, we can't expect the cutoff to bet after he checked back the turn. We have reason to believe that we're best, and we're going to make our opponent pay. I bet 200 for value. We can have hands like king, queen, and several combinations containing 8s for straights, so there's very little chance that we'll ever get raised in this spot by a bluff. Whether or not we get called, that's a different story. Though I'd expect to get called by smaller 2-pair combos, overpairs, and maybe some ace-jack or king-jack can make a crying call, but it's really unlikely that we'll ever be bluffing on this board with our line. The cutoff reluctantly puts in calling chips. We show him what we took him to Value Town with. It's best. The opponent mucks his cards face down. We'll never know what he had. It's a nice little pot that goes our way. We're up about $1,000 on the night now. We're playing 6-handed at the moment as the elf limps in for 50. Gazzy Phil raises to 200 from the under the gun straddle. We've got Jack 10 of spades and double straddle. I call. Small blind calls as well. We're going 3 ways to the flop in position. The dealer puts out 8-7-4 all spades. We flop a flush with a straight flush draw. Small blind checks. As he's doing this, Gazzy looks at his cards for a spade outside of the camera's view. Gazzy checks. I know exactly what suits and denomination my cards are, but I check my cards purely for deception and balance, so that when I'm genuinely checking to see if I have one card with a particular suit in my hand, good players like Gazzy won't be able to rule out me having flushes. To fully commit to the facade, I sneakily check back the flush. I'm a lot more comfortable checking back the jack-high flush in this instance because the 9 of spades will give us the absolute nuts, and that card might allow us to stack anyone holding the ace of spades. If the flop were 8-4-3 all spades, I'd be less inclined to check back a vulnerable flush. The turn is another 7 pairing the board. Small blind checks. Gazzy is now more confident that his third pair with the straight flush draw is best. He bets 400. If Gazzy was genuinely checking his cards for a spade on the flop, then he won't have 2 spades for a better flush. He wouldn't have a set or 2 pair that turn into a full house either because the spade versions for the denomination of cards he'd be holding would be on the flop and Gazzy wouldn't need to check for him. This is an extremely reliable live tell with recreational players, but you still need to be careful with players that have been around for a while because they might switch things up on you, like I've been attempting to do throughout the hand. Gazzy is certainly capable of fake checking his cards for a spade, so I can't completely rule out him having ace or king high flushes. I've just significantly discounted it in my mind, partly because there are so many spades that are already accounted for. I call, which I might have done with a variety of pair or 1 spade combinations. Small blind folds, it's down to heads up. The river is the deuce of diamonds. We've gotten a great run out. The opponent checks, which I don't think you do very often with a better flush. Between the live tells coupled with how this has been played, I've mostly ruled out all the hands that are beating us. Now I've got the green light to bet, and because of the false live tells I was attempting to give off and my weak looking line so far, I go with a huge overbet of 2,000 to make it appear as if I'm attempting a last ditch effort to seal this pot as a bluff with something like king 10 offsuit with 1 spade. Gazzy has removal to straights and flushes, plus our story doesn't make any sense, especially if we were truly checking our cards on the flop for 1 spade. My river play doesn't seem consistent with physical tells or how I played the hand earlier. Gazzy has to see.
Wow. What a play by Brad, the overbet.
There's a lot of 30 houses. Look at one of the small neighborhoods. And a lot of the
Brad's making some plays.
There's a lot of nuance to that hand that leads us to getting our big overbet paid off. It's even more interesting because I wouldn't have attempted those tricks if I wasn't up against an opponent who I know is a good thinking player. We get the perfect run out to make the maximum from just a pair of 6s. Okay, let's get to the game. I've got Jack 10 suited in the big blind. The cutoff opens to 65. He's the player who looked cold, and I tried to warm up by lighting $200 on fire with pocket 7s earlier. He hasn't raised much pre-flop, and he doesn't really have a large enough stack on his own for me to be calling here. I call for 55 more because it's likely that the under the gun straddler will join in who has a much larger stack. Surprisingly, under the gun folds, it's heads up. The flop comes Jack 10 6 with 2 hearts. We flop middle pair with a flush draw and a backdoor royal flush draw. What a time to be alive. I check, the opponent checks back. The turn is the 7 of hearts. We make the flush. I can't allow another free card to come off. I bet 100. Sleeping Beauty wakes up and raises to 300. He shouldn't have a better flush. He probably would have bet flop with the ace high or queen high draw. He already got half of his stack in. No need to Hollywood. I immediately jam for 600 effective. Right after, the opponent says just about the best thing that I could hear.
Sir.
40 seconds go by, then the opponent has a little more to say.
I see that coming, bud.
I turn over the flush. We're now officially playing for the cutoff's entire stack. There's 1 card to come. The river is the ace of diamonds. No other hands improved to beat us. The cutoff shows that he has pocket kings. I was caught off guard to see that he was that strong after it seemed like he was genuinely considering folding the turn. All the Bradley dollars I gave to him earlier returned to the rightful owner, and they've made some friends. The very next hand, I purposefully start filming late to avoid the dealer telling everyone what I have.
I've specifically not shown my hand to the camera.
He said that I specifically didn't look. He said the guy on TV had ace. I'm like, he's not watching TV. I'm really confused.
Anyway, we have Jack 10 suited in the hijack, under the gun limped in. I raised to 40, the button called, under the gun called. We're going 3 ways to the flop. It's king 9-9 with 2 clubs. We've got a gutter on a paired board. Under the gun checks. There's a decent flop for my range. I bet 110. The bluff isn't going to get through. The button calls. That's our boy Adam. Under the gun folds. It's down to heads up. The turn is the 7 of diamonds, giving us a double gutter. I was going to give up. Now that I've improved, my plan has changed. I fire for 260. The opponent has already said that he folded top to me previously. I'm showing a lot of strength here too. He could be willing to fold a king, but there's a good chance that he called the flop bet with some sort of draw or backdoor draw, and will be happy to fold something even worse. He makes the laydown, we get the bluff through on the second attempt, and the dealer didn't even try to sabotage me.
I don't know if this one will make it. Probably not. Probably not. Way to keep my hand a secret this time, though.
Hey, what's the word? Hey.
You got it.
Swear to God, if they really watching,
You can hear me express a little hesitation about whether or not to even include this hand in the vlog. It's a good example of one that may be on the cusp. The table talk made it more fun and pushed it over the edge. Not long after, we get involved with Jack 10 of hearts in the hijack. I raised to 50, under the gun calls with a very short stack. He's one of the only recreational players at the table. We're heads up in position, the flop comes ace king jack with 2 clubs, the opponent checks. I take a $40 stab at it with bottom pair and a straight draw. With all Broadway cards out there, this is a much better board for us since we didn't get 3-bet pre-flop. Under the gun calls, the turn is the jack of diamonds giving us trips. The player checks, there's no way that we're checking back. I bet 200 to charge flush draws and hands containing an ace. If the opponent is holding an ace, he may think that I'm betting larger to get him off a chop in the scenario that we both have 2 pair and a king kicker. Under the gun calls, leaving himself with only 140 behind. The river is the queen of hearts. It gives us a straight, but I don't love it since the straight we have is obvious and it could be tougher for us to get additional value than it would have been if the river was a blank. Under the gun checks, occasionally, you just have to dig deep and go for it by ripping it in for massive amounts when you don't even have the nuts. This is one of those occasions. I grab chips and announce that I'm on. Okay, I only grabbed 2 chips and the all-in is for 140 effective, but it's still very exciting stuff. We don't get snap called, indicating that we have the winner. The player's thinking about it. Ultimately, the all-in is too intimidating, the opponent folds. We win a medium-sized pot to inch closer towards the even mark. I let the opponent see that we had him beat from at least the turn on. We're still looking for our first win of the session, and we pick up Jack 10 suited on the button. A player in middle position raises to 20. We call, the small blind calls, the big blind calls as well. We're going 4 ways to the flop in position. It comes king 6-6 rainbow. Not much going on for us. We all check. The turn is the 9 of hearts. We pick up a gutter. Small blind bets 50. I don't quite believe that he has a big hand. The big blind and middle position player fold. I'm not in the mood to fold. Calling with a straight draw while there's a flush draw on board of the wrong suit doesn't seem like a great plan either. I raised to 130 to represent a hand like pocket 9s. Mostly, I just want to get my opponent to fold whatever he's pretending to have. He probably has some type of draw as well. If he calls, we can continue firing as a bluff on the river, or we can maybe drill a queen and bet for value. The small blind calls for 80 more, it's down to heads up. The river is the queen of spades giving us a straight. There's not much better than semi-bluffing and getting there. The small blind checks. If we missed, I was planning to bomb it. In this case, we got there and need to stay balanced. I make it 400 to charge the opponent if he really wants to see what we've got. He's suspicious that we don't have anything. Even with the purest of bluff catchers, the opponent folds. He may have had a hand like queen 9 or 10-9 with no heart. We take down the first pot of the session for us. Maybe that'll spark a winning streak. Yo Viral comes in as an alternate for Ivy. He buys into the game for $500,000 to start. Even with the graphics finally getting sorted out for us, we still have less than 1/6 that amount in front of us as we raise to 600 with Jack 10 of hearts. Hellmuth calls in the small blind with a hand that doesn't have us in great shape. We're heads up in position. The flop comes king queen 3 rainbow. We've got the straight draw with backdoor flush possibilities on a board that will more often than not favor us as the pre-flop aggressor. Hellmuth checks. We're drawing to the nuts and can pretty much get all the pocket pairs from 10s down to 4s to fold with a bet. I fire for 700 as a semi-bluff. Hellmuth is going nowhere with his top pair. He cuts out chips quickly and makes the call. The turn is the deuce of spades. Hellmuth immediately checks as it comes out. We've got air, but perhaps we can get a hand like queen jack or queen 10 to fold at this juncture if we bet. We can have hands like sets of kings and sets of queens on this flop that Hellmuth won't have. I bet 2,000 to keep the pressure on, not anticipating getting check raised almost ever. Hellmuth throws a wrench in that plan with a min raise to 4,000. If he had a 2-pair or better hand, I would have expected a bigger sizing. We're getting 4.5 to 1 on the call, so we're getting about the right pot odds to stick around, especially when considering any implied odds that we may have if we drill a 9. We call for 2,000 more. The river is the 5 of spades. We brick, but the backdoor flush draw gets there. Hellmuth is concerned that we could have a flush, aces, ace king, or something else that beats him. He checks. We've got the worst hand that we'll ever have. We played it like we had a draw on the turn, then the best draw got there. We don't even beat ace jack or ace 10 if that's what Phil might have put the check raise bluff in with. I still get the sense that we're up against a one pair hand like a king or a queen. We'll have to bet a decent amount to get a king to fold. I'm going to fire big.
9,000?
Having only jack high and some of the draws making it, Brad will feel compelled to bluff this river. I like this bluff.
I don't even know if I can take it anymore.
It would be nice to have a spade, but it is the type of board where it's somewhat difficult for Brad to have bluffs. Most likely his only bluffs to choose from are jack 10. Perhaps he has a little bit of ace jack, ace 10, but those may even just check and see showdown. So nice execution here by Brad. Whether or not it works, we're going to find out.
Phil is feeling the heat, so he unzips that jacket as he's put to the test. He knows that he really doesn't beat anything that I'd be betting for value. He has a pure bluff catcher if he wants to call. The thing that I have going for me is that I haven't shown down any big bluffs so far today, so my image is really solid. The bad thing is that Phil has stuck a good chunk, making him perhaps more likely to call, and by this time he's aware that Doyle bluffed him earlier for quite a bit. He likely doesn't want to get bluffed twice on stream in fairly large pots. This is a situation which, if you're Phil, you prefer to have a spade in your hand so that there are fewer combos that I could have like ace jack, jack 10, or jack 9 of spades. I'm doing my very best not to give anything away as I'm putting on one of the biggest bluffs that I've ever put on anyone, and it's the man with more accolades than anyone else in poker. He doesn't want to let go.
Phil does find the call. Wow. He's going to be very happy.
Fuck, I couldn't
See that he has
imagine
the
a
best
hand I
hand.
could beat, so I kept saying to myself, stop imagining, because you can't beat anything. Just decide whether he has it or not.
Positivity.
After 5.5 hours of running it up, Hellmuth makes a difficult call, causing us to lose over half of our profit. We're about 7 hours into the session when we pick up jack 10 suited on the button. This hand is particularly fun to play because it can make 4 separate straights that will all be the nuts. I raised to 30. My buddy Kevin took a break to use the restroom, and our mutual friend and poker crusher, Ronnie Barda, took Kevin's seat to hang out and sweat the action for a little bit. The big blind calls, we're heads up in position. Hit the like button on the count of 3 if you want to see some run good. Ready? 1, 2, 3. The flop comes King, Queen, 9, all spades. For the first time in my life, I flop a straight flush. It's the first straight flush of my own that I've ever captured on the vlog. This is awesome. The big blind checks. It's not a flop that'll connect too well with his range, and we can't possibly lose the hand. I check back. The turn is the ace of clubs. It's another card that should be better for us. The big blind checks. He may have complete air. I want to build this pot, but the best way to make money is probably to give the big blind one more opportunity to bluff at it. I check again. The river is as unbelievable as it gets. It's the ace of spades giving us the royal flush. We've got the best hand in poker with the best suit. Some people go their entire lives without hitting a royal flush. Daniel Negreanu famously has never hit one. This is even more insane since this is a 6-card royal flush, which I've never heard of anyone doing ever. I've actually hit a few royal flushes before, but this is the coolest one. The big blind checks. There's almost no way that he has anything too strong, especially since the 6 highest spades are all accounted for. I want to at least make some money and possibly induce a bluff. I bet 10, the absolute minimum. The opponent doesn't seem like he even wants to pay that amount. It'd be a huge shame if he folded. Fortunately, he calls.
Royal flush. $10 for a royal flush is going to do it. Royal flush.
Yeah. Ronnie Barda.
You know, I've made 10 royal flushes in my life.
That is my 6th one or something?
Made 10. One card and the rest were 2 cards. Flop one.
Jesus.
You know, there's some people have never made any.
I know.
Despite hitting multiple royal flushes in the past, this one is very special, and we got paid, well, sort of. The big blind would later tell me that he had a king and would have paid up to $20, so I guess we didn't quite make the maximum.